koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Nicole toku ingoa. Kia ora, I'm Nicole. It is my immense privilege and honour to be the first speaker at the very first Product Aotearoa conference. And so I want to start by saying a huge thank you to DJ and the numerous other people who have done such hard work over the past months to make this a reality. I've been in tech for about a decade now, and so I've gone to my fair share of tech conferences and developer conferences, and I've always left them like absolutely jazzed by the enthusiasm, the ability to share in a community and have all this knowledge kind of shared together. I've always had that little bit of FOMO that we haven't had our own space like this for product people. And so it's pretty surreal to not only be at this conference, but getting to speak at this conference. And it's also a little bit surreal because for the people in the audience who know me, you'll also know I'm a recovering perfectionist. So for me to be on the stage talking about failure is a little bit ironic because we don't necessarily go hand in hand together. But I figure, let's dive in. Hopefully the first talk, the first ever Product Aotearoa isn't a fail, and that either way we learn a lot together on this journey. So it's my belief that the best way for us to get over failure, and as Anthony said, to start creating value by learning quickly and making most of this valuable investment we have as product managers, we have to reframe failure, and we have to do that by lowering the cost to learn. So it's no longer this big, scary, negative thing. It's just a part of our process. So today I'm going to share with you some reflections on why failure is uncomfortable. What are the costs of failure? Is it just money and time? Or are there some psychological costs that actually hold us back more significantly? Then I'm going to take you down a little bit of a journey about how are we going at TradeMe? What have we learnt? We're still a work in progress, but we've had some wins along the way. And then lastly, I'm going to share with you some tactics that we employ day to day in order to create a learning culture that hopefully will be things that you can take away and use in your team, regardless of what stage or scale you're at. I've been at TradeMe for 5 years. I've also been a parent for 5 years. In fact, when I started at TradeMe, I was pregnant with my first child, my son Ezra, who drew this portrait. This is our family. He's here in the middle with the much larger head, which is probably equivalent to his brain size at the moment. This is his sister Sloane, who is 18 months old. My husband Luke, who wasn't entirely impressed with the dad bod implication on this. I'm over here. We don't have a cat or a third child, so I can't entirely tell you who this friend is. But the reason I share this with you is one of the greatest joys that I've had of parenting is getting to watch these tiny little humans learn. I'm constantly impressed by the pace at which they learn and the ability to learn without fear of failure. There's nothing that gives me as much pride as watching them learn a new skill, whether it's my daughter learning her first words or my son coming home and sharing a new song he's learned in Te Reo. I'm immensely proud of them, and one thing I've noticed is that they just attack learning with absolute vigour. So at age 2, my son could only barely hold a paintbrush and create these abstract scribbles. And in just over 2 years, he's now following along with YouTube tutorials. He's able to create these characters with personality and emotion. And it's just such a rapid expansion of his learning. So out of interest, show of hands, who here is also a parent? Oh, look at that. So about half of us. So what you'll also know is that parenting is exhausting. It is so much fun, but they ask so many questions. And asking questions is exactly how they learn. Nothing is off limits. No question is silly. I get asked, how am I talking on the phone to someone in Auckland? How do phones work? And I have to realise I don't know how to explain that as a concept. They just do. And when I saw this step before as a parent, I thought it was one of those myths that parents tell other people to make it seem harder than it is. And now I'm a parent, I wonder, is it maybe a little bit of an underestimation? So they ask a lot of questions, but then this really interesting thing happens as we get older, and it starts when we get to school. Our number of questions starts to decline, and there's a good reason for that, which is as we enter the school system, we're actually given the tools and the techniques to be able to find out the answers for ourselves, which is great. But the not great thing about this is we also start to learn hesitancy with asking questions. We start to worry about what our friends and our teachers will think about the questions we ask. We start to associate asking questions with not knowing the answer. We start to get worried about having the wrong answers, and we develop a sense of embarrassment about that. And I'm not sure that I could handle everyone at Trade Me asking me 200 to 300 questions a day, but I do believe the pendulum might have swung a little bit too far. So what if we could re-harness that enthusiasm of children and our earlier capacity to embrace learning without fear of failure? What if we also treated learning with the same encouragement, excitement, and celebration that we afford children? As product people, curiosity is our superpower. We need to be asking lots of really good questions all along the way. So we need to figure out, how do we get rid of our fear of failure? And how do we lower the cost to learn? So what is holding us back from embracing failure with childlike enthusiasm? And now this is the part that as a perfectionist, I feel the least comfortable about. But I can't stand on this stage and give a talk about failure without sharing one of my own. And so this one comes about a couple of years ago. We were just coming out of COVID lockdowns, and in New Zealand and internationally, there was a booming e-commerce growth. We pitched to our board an ambitious new strategy, and we put forward 3 options: good, better, best. With the first 2 options, we were reasonably confident on the investment levels. We had some really good validated bets on our roadmap. But the third option was a little bit of a moonshot. I don't think we really thought in the uncertainty of 2021 that the board was really going to back us with this high level of investment. And of course, that's where the fail came in. They turned around and they said, so if we give you more money, what would you go faster on? What would you pull forward? And so we pulled forward an unvalidated bet from our long-term roadmap. It was something that we had some certainty of because we'd spoken to international peers who had launched this particular feature. It was an improvement to a product listing page that allowed buyers to compare products more easily. They'd been able to show us the metrics that had impacted their customers and therefore their businesses, and they told us it was a must-have. The problem is we hadn't validated it in the New Zealand context, and we hadn't validated it with our customers. We put it into our strategy, and the fail was we named it as a feature. And as you all know, the second a feature is named and put in an annual plan or a strategy pack, it creates this tangibility. It becomes a thing. It imbues it with a certainty and confidence that it possibly had no right to. And I think a small tweak in how we'd communicated that and talked more about the problem space or the solutions that we might have investigated could have really changed that dynamic. And it could have saved us from a much bigger fail later down the track. But that's not what we did. We described a feature. And of course, then we started to report on the feature. We embarked on discovery, but we embarked to find out how we would do the feature, whether it was the right thing. We didn't really truly embark to prove ourselves wrong. The team did a fantastic job. We sliced it as thin as possible and only released it to a small set of customers. But it was complex, so it did take us a quarter to build. And when we released it to our customers, it failed. It didn't move the metrics we expected. And the reality was that New Zealand just wasn't a big enough scale for this feature to work. And we definitely could have learnt this earlier. If we'd set the team up to really truly explore the problem space, I'm sure that they would have ditched this in discovery much earlier. And so let's have a think about, when we reflect on these failures, what are the costs and risks of that failure that make us feel so uncomfortable? I think as humans, we like to consider ourselves as super rational. We think about the time and the money, the product waste of not doing discovery in the right way. We think about the return on investment that we've made. And we think about that as a tangible addition and subtraction equation. But when I reflected on this listing page fail, I realized it wasn't just the money and time that was bothering me. It was also the psychological cost of this. I was embarrassed. I had set the team up to fail by allowing an unvalidated feature to be explicitly labelled in a strategy pack. I am like the biggest advocate for outcome-based roadmaps. The first ever product book I brought was Bruce's book, Roadmaps Relaunched. And so for me to say I'd set the team up for failure really hurt. I felt like I'd put my reputation on the line with the board and it hadn't gone well. The other psychological cost that we encounter as we work through failure is morale. Our teams work really hard. They also want to solve customer problems. And when we put out a feature that doesn't fly with our customers, morale can take a hit. People can feel like all that hard work wasn't actually valuable. And the last psychological risk is momentum. When we run the risk of putting all of our eggs in one basket and it doesn't pan out, it can feel like a real halt to our momentum. We have to take this big step back. We have to start again. And it really feels like we're no longer moving forward towards a customer problem. And so collectively, these are all the costs of failure that we need to think about. How do we reduce in order to stop it being this big, scary, horrible thing and actually just a part of how we're learning? Our listing page proof of concept was released while I was on paternity leave for the second time. And when I returned to Trade Me, I quite honestly just avoided talking about it for a while. But then I realized that if I didn't face into this, I risked repeating it. And if there's anything worse for a perfectionist than failing, it's failing twice in the same way. When I reflected on this too, I realized an interesting thing. Not only was I avoiding the failure, I was also avoiding everything to do with strategy. And yes, there'd been one feature that hadn't gone to plan, hadn't done what we expected. But the other 90% of things that we set out to do were insanely successful. And I was doing myself and our team a disservice by not allowing myself to celebrate that part because of the failure as well. And by avoiding the failure, I was missing the lessons behind it. And so I had to face into it. I had to put my ego aside. And luckily now, it's been a couple of years, we've been able to take those learnings. And later in this talk, I'll share with you how our strategy process has evolved as a reflection of learning that we didn't do it the right way that time. Of course, this is still not the most comfortable talk to tell. We're used to going to conferences and hearing about the great, the success stories, the ideal conditions. And I think, as Anthony said, we need to think about how we do better at failure so that we can all be more successful. And sometimes that's going to be about sharing the bad, being a bit more vulnerable. And I'm really pleased to say that I know some of the speakers today are going to do that for you. And I know that's when I learn the most. A study of software projects in New Zealand found that a contributing factor in a lot of them was the fact that they didn't have any learning processes in place. They weren't stopping and going, are we actually heading in the right direction here? When we shy away from failure, we risk continuing down paths and investing in ideas for a lot longer than we should. Now, as product people, we operate in the complex, the ambiguous, the grey. So running away from failure is simply not an option. By the time these projects and failures get to the media, we cast them in the most negative lights. We put them forward as if they are a thing that must be avoided at all costs, rather than being just an inevitability of complex product solving. And I'm willing to bet that whenever you read a story like this, there were smart people in those teams that for days, weeks, or months knew that this wasn't going to pan out. But for a variety of reasons, that wasn't listened to. Perhaps it was leadership that weren't prepared to change their minds and take in new information, or perhaps it was environments where there wasn't the psychological safety to raise those concerns. But perhaps it's a Kiwi culture thing. You know, we're very open to saying she'll be right. We don't really love conflict. What about in those companies that are world leading at product? Are they just much better at failure than Kiwis? Here's a question for you. What percentage of A/B tests at Netflix do you think positively moved the outcome that they intended? Do you think they've got a similar sort of level of success as maybe flipping a coin, 50-50? Who reckons at least 50% of the time they'd get it right? This is the part where you put your hand up if you think that they... Thank you. I briefed the team earlier. This is the part where I said put your hand up now. Okay, cool. So about 50%. Put your hand up if you think actually smart product people, they're probably knowing their customers really well. They probably get it right more than 50% of the time. So like 60 to 70% of the time. Oh, you're all a room of cynics. There's a few people. Is anyone super optimistic who thinks that they get it right like 80% of the time? Oh, all right, we'll go the other way. Who thinks it's 30, 40% of the time they get it right? Here you go. Cynical, but you know, you've still got some faith that at least a third of the time they get it right. The reality is 1 in 10 A/B tests for Netflix successfully moves the intended outcome. A study of Microsoft A/B tests found that in a third of their A/B tests, it negatively moved the outcome they intended. And let's be honest, we're all smart people, right? We're not putting A/B tests out that we think are terrible ideas. So these are all good ideas to start with. And the reality is Netflix is in good company. Google, Airbnb, Booking.com. Booking.com is so good at A/B testing that their internal software is now an external A/B testing platform. They put out thousands of tests a week. And yet they have a philosophy that everything gets tested because they don't believe anyone from the CEO to the most experienced product manager to the intern has any better chance of guessing the outcome of customer behaviour. So predicting customer behaviour is just really hard. So we've got to get over our fear of failure. And one thing that really struck me when I looked at this A/B testing research is the way that they framed success. So they said that the tests that managed to move the intended metric were successful, which sort of implies that the other 90% were failures, right? But were they failures if they also contributed valuable learning? Are those 90% of tests what saves our customers from unnecessary complexity and feature bloat? Do we need to frame all A/B tests as successful in the terms of what we learnt from them? There's a lot of wording changes that can be small tweaks that help us embrace failure as a learning. Because unfortunately, as much as it pains me as a perfectionist to say, we're going to be wrong a lot more than we're right. In fact, I know a lot about Trade Me customers, and I can still tell you about at least 3 hypotheses in the last fortnight, which I would have quite happily put my own money on and were completely wrong about. And luckily, I only bet a cup of coffee, so the risk of failure is pretty low. So it's our job to share with our teams and our leadership that we're in this game of complexity and uncertainty. There's no sure bets, but we can increase our odds. We can kill as many of the good ideas before they reach our customers as possible. So now, what's the Trade Me journey? How have we created this culture of learning in our organisation? We believe culture is all about those micro interactions, the things you allow, you reinforce, you accept, and you celebrate on a daily basis. So if failure in learning is essential to product management, how do we go about lowering the cost to learn and building supportive learning cultures? Now, I want to point out that Trade Me is on a journey, which means we are still a work in progress. We haven't got all the answers and we don't do everything perfectly. But we have scraped our knees a few times and had some wins along the way, and we think that they are worth sharing with you all. And of course, context is important to any story. Trade Me is New Zealand's largest online marketplace and classified site. And that means every day, 650,000 Kiwi come to our website and apps to browse over 7 million listings. We've been around for over 24 years, connecting millions of buyers and sellers throughout Aotearoa. As a team, we have around 550 people. About half of those work in product, design, and engineering roles, which means I'm quite lucky today. I've stacked the audience, and about 10% of you are from Trade Me today. It's important to note all of this because we do have the privilege of scale, both in our user base and our team. But all the things I'm going to share today aren't magic, and I truly believe they're things that you can apply in any team, any company, at any stage. When we started our product journey about 5 years ago, we were quite fragmented. Each of our product areas had different roles and responsibilities, different ways of working, different structures, and all that cumulatively meant it was really hard to share knowledge across teams. We often relearnt things again and again, making the same mistakes. The other thing that happened was that our product managers spent a lot of their time in that delivery phase, right? It was really common to feel like you were always running to keep one step ahead of the engineering team. We had really minimal capacity to be able to do discovery ahead of time or alongside. Now, what that all meant is that we had a really strong A/B testing culture, but in reality, we were using the delivery phase to learn if the solution was right. So our A/B tests were actually more like staged MVP rollouts. It's a really expensive and slow way to learn if a solution is the right thing to do. So we've consciously moved a lot more of our time and energy into the discovery phase, trying to figure out how many of our ideas we can refine, kill, improve, while the cost of walking away is as low as possible. Of course, we didn't wake up one day as product people and just decide, we're going to stop doing that, we're going to come over here and we're only going to do that, and we're just going to let everything over here just go. There was a lot of things that had to happen in order for us to consciously shift towards discovery. There were things like we've changed the scope of the product management role. We've introduced new product ownership roles that allow us to kind of separate some of the short-term delivery of the roadmap as well. We've had dedicated product investment into practice, both in partnership with ThoughtWorks, but also establishing product practice lead roles and agile practice lead roles. We've orientated ourselves around persistent, long-lived value streams. Now, this has allowed us to have a much wider view of the value that we deliver customers and not just the things that we build. This has unlocked more collaboration across sales and marketing, other teams, and TradeMe. And finally, I think one of the really key things that has allowed us to change our product practice has been a top-down involvement in product practice. I think it's really common to think of product as just things that product people do. But as product people, if you are really great at continuous discovery, but every time you talk to an executive, they're asking you, when are you going to ship the feature? There's a massive disconnect. And so to create a culture of learning, you need to reinforce learning at every phase. And we're really lucky. Our head of marketplace is just as likely to applaud us when we disprove a hypothesis as she is to challenge us about whether we're learning fast enough. And so that means that learning culture is reinforced in every conversation and isn't something that we're just trying to keep alive in our own little product bubble. All right, so I've told you a bit about our journey. I've told you why failure is hard. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how do we actually lower the cost to fail, whether it's tangible time and money or psychological, morale, momentum, and reputation. These are the things that work for us at TradeMe. The first thing we strive to do is lower that time and money cost. A mantra we refer to as, how can we be scrappy? How can we learn fast? When our confidence is low and we've got an idea but no real evidence, then we need to be thinking about how are we investing appropriately for that confidence level. Are you prepared to put a day of your time on the line, your lunch on the line, a week? And then the things that you do to experiment to learn should line up with that current confidence level. So for us, we want to build as much confidence in this early phase as possible, again, where that cost of walking away is as low as possible. Sometimes things we do is paper prototypes and street testing. It might be doing data dives. It might be things like scrappy phone calls to test ideas with customers really quickly, or it might be as simple as getting internal customer groups together to understand the relevancy of our search engine. Experimentation is a practice about building up predictability. No single experiment is going to tell you the exact sort of business return on investment of an idea. It's not meant to do that. It's meant to test your riskiest assumptions. Then you collectively build all of this knowledge together to have a better view of what customers will actually do. The second thing we do is we face into uncertainty, because product management is all about the uncertain and the complex. Being clear about this helps to lower our reputation costs. We're not putting forward our ideas as if we absolutely know what's going to happen, because as we've heard, you don't. The problem with this, though, is that humans hate uncertainty. In fact, some British researchers were able to scientifically prove this using a painful electric shock machine. In a study that I don't know how got past the ethics board, they proved that uncertainty is more stressful than inevitable pain. What they did is they hooked up two groups of participants to an electric shock machine, and they told one of them, you're 100% about to get a painful shock. They told the other group, you've got a 50% chance of getting a painful electric shock. It's the people with uncertainty of pain that felt the most stress and the most agitation. Even though it's not logical and they had half as much chance of being painfully shocked, those are the people who felt the most stressed. And when we know that it is uncomfortable and stressful to be in these times, we can consciously lean into it and we can build that muscle. One way to build this muscle is to actually say, we don't know yet, but here's a plan to learn about it. It's the exact opposite of fake it till you make it. When I was early in product, I felt this huge pressure to answer all the questions from the teams and the stakeholders around me. But the more I learned about the customers, the more I realized I don't know. And here's a dirty little secret. No one else does either. So by saying this, we get to take down the walls of pretense, and we can all put out there those fears, those assumptions, and we can get on with the work of testing them. The final thing that we do is we celebrate learning progress. And this is about lowering those momentum and morale hits when an idea doesn't pan out. It's a lot easier to do if you've got 10 more coming down the pipeline. But in product, sometimes it's the delivery side that feels the most tangible and easy to celebrate. We can count Jira tickets shipped, we can talk about features released, we can talk about story points accumulated. And the process of discovery can feel a little vague and intangible. One way that we give tangibility to discovery is through hypothesis-driven discovery. Because as humans, we love a good checklist. It makes us feel like we're moving forward. So whenever we're engaging in discovery, we like to have a visualization of all of the questions we've got, all the assumptions we've got, so that we can share in Slack and different channels, hey, this is right, this is wrong. A really great example of this from our team was back again in lockdowns, where we suddenly had all of the financial pressure of the company on our shoulders in marketplace. We couldn't sell homes or cars or advertise jobs. It was kind of up to us to make some money to keep us all employed. And so, of course, we were all running around going, how do we do this? Should we sell more toilet paper? Start listing groceries? Great ideas. And one product manager said, how about we just slow down and we ask our customers? Which at the time felt really painful. No one wanted to slow down. And so she sent out a survey, and I remember vividly the presentation she gave after it. She said, we've got 7 assumptions, and she went through them one by one, and we got 6 of them wrong. And at every stage, there was a celebration of, oh, good thing we didn't build that. And so out of that, we were a lot smarter, and we were able to move forward with the one idea, which was actually what Kiwi wanted for us in that moment in time. And so it was a lot more valuable for us, and we also felt a sense of momentum. We knew we were learning more as we went, rather than just frantically building things. So let's circle back to that fail, that listing page that we built. In reflection, it was mainly a fail in communication, how we set this up with the board. But we learned a lot about the strategy process. And so then when we approached strategy this year, we started with a pre-mortem. We said, what did we learn about that? What do we hope doesn't happen this time? And what do we really want to achieve? We knew it was important not to turn up at the end of that process with a rabbit out of a hat and say, ta-da, new strategy. So we created a bunch of learning opportunities for our wider team, for 200 people to come to drop-in sessions and hear all the way along when we were right and wrong in what we were learning. We shared often and early, so we shared things like pencil mock-ups, because this encourages actual feedback. If you provide really crisp strategy slides and say, what do you think? People will expect to give like a little bit of feedback on a typo, not some actual feedback on the strategy direction. And one other thing that we've done is we've moved away from talking about our product work as initiatives. We talk about product work now as bets. And when we talk in bets, we reinforce the fact that there is uncertainty in the outcome. We remind ourselves and our teams that we don't know for sure what's going to happen. And I feel very lucky and privileged to be able to go through this strategy process a couple of times now, both the good and the bad. As uncomfortable as the fails feel, it's in those times I learn the most, not when everything goes smoothly. And so when I feel that quiet discomfort of failure growing inside me, I like to think of this quote from Nelson Mandela. I never lose, I either win or I learn. And so I'm going to leave you with a few questions to take back into your organisation. How does failure feel today? Are you excited to tell people that you've learnt you were wrong? Or are you hesitant? And what could it feel like in the future? What do you celebrate? Is it the things you ship or the things you learn? Can you measure how fast you're learning? Do you know if you're getting faster? And how do you lower those costs to learn? Let's reframe failure. Make learning as cheap and as simple as possible. I want to finish up today by acknowledging that all of product is about people. And I've got to stand up here and honestly share all of the learnings and mahi of people in the product team, a lot of which I haven't done myself. I want to thank the awesome product team I get to work with at TradeMe for teaching me so much every day. I have the absolute privilege of being in the messiness of product with some awesome people. I also want to do a quick shout out to ThoughtWorks, who have been instrumental in uplifting our product practice and just being in our teams. And then finally, I want to thank you all and everyone behind the scenes of Product Aotearoa for giving me a platform to embrace my failure and share it all with you today. Thank you.